before we get into some of the detailed questions, if you could just give us your take on why Putin started this war in the first place, because that's going to inform how it might end.
Yeah, well, it started because of failed deterrence on our part. We, the West, did nothing after they invaded Georgia in 2008. We did nothing after they invaded Ukraine in 2014, and we really did nothing after they jumped over the red line in Syria about Assad using chemical weapons against his own people. So it was our failure to actually stop Russia when we could have. The Ukrainians need support. And while I'm proud of what the U.S. has done, the fact it took 8 months to get this last aid package through is a reflection of, number one, our own internal domestic issues, but also, frankly, the president has the responsibility to explain why this matters. And, you know, the fact that we have not said we want Ukraine to actually win, to defeat Russia, push them back to 1991 borders, that has, if you don't have a clear objective, it's difficult to have good policy. The only way we prevent Russia from continuing forward is by defeating them. The idea that somehow there's a negotiated settlement with Russia, people that believe that have either never looked at a map or they don't know who Russia is, don't understand that the Russians have zero evidence that they would ever live up to any agreement that we can't enforce. Why is it important for us, for the United States, for people that live in Missouri and California and New York and Michigan and Georgia? Number one, our economy, our prosperity is tied directly to European prosperity. It's the biggest trade relationship on the planet between the United States and Europe. So if there's a massive war going on in Europe that interrupts food supplies, energy supplies, or puts millions of Ukrainian refugees on the road into Europe, that affects our prosperity. That's number one. Number two, we do not want to have U.S. troops involved in a conflict in Europe as part of NATO. So if Ukraine is able to defeat Russia with our help, that will never happen. So that's the best way to avoid us being into that conflict. And then number three, of course, the Chinese are watching to see, are we serious when we talk about the so-called international rules-based order, freedom of navigation, respect for sovereignty, respect for human rights, respect for international agreements, all those things that we say are so important. If we don't commit to defending those things against Russia, where it's much easier to do it in Europe than it would be out in the Pacific, then I don't think the Chinese will be very impressed when we talk about sovereignty or respect for freedom of navigation out in the Indo-Pacific. I think that the two other things that people should be aware of, Russia will absorb tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and all their equipment. Ukrainians won't be volunteering to join the Russian army, but the Russian army will absorb them and force them into the fight. So actually, the Russian army becomes stronger if they succeed against Ukraine and hoover up all of this equipment and hoover up these soldiers. And then, of course, the air and missile attacks that are happening against Ukrainian cities and killing innocent people in Ukraine, you can be sure that if Russia has made the terrible decision to attack a NATO country, then they've already made the terrible decision to launch missiles and rockets against the infrastructure and civilians in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania.
I met with a Ukrainian combat medic, a woman named Tata, who has been a volunteer combat medic since 2021. And she described the fighting she's recently seen and just the unimaginable conditions the soldiers are living and fighting in. She was recently serving on the front line in southern Ukraine near Kherson, and described it as people just fighting with their own flesh and how difficult it is to medevac wounded Ukrainian soldiers because Russians don't respect or follow the Geneva Convention laws, which state that purposefully attacking or killing medics is a war crime. In fact, she shared that Russian forces are intentionally prioritizing the targeting of medics because they assess that if they kill a medic, then they kill more soldiers indirectly. But still, Ukraine fights on, and after all of my meetings with civil society as well as armed forces partners, I'm confident that the armed forces of Ukraine can stop these Russian advances if they are properly equipped and if they continue to be properly equipped by the US and Western partners.